Now, before this audience, I do not need to go into greater detail except to add this. If you want to live in peace with other people and avoid all physical clashes, and if such clashes do occur, seek to resolve them peacefully, then you must be an anarchist or a proponent of a private law society, or more precisely, you must be a private property anarchist, an anarcho-capitalist, or, as I said, a proponent of a private law society. And by implication then, and again, without much further ado, someone or anyone is not a libertarian or merely a fake libertarian who affirms and advocates one or more of the following things, for instance: the necessity of a state, any state, of public or state property, and of taxes in order to live in peace, or who affirms the existence and justifiability of any so-called human rights or civil rights other than private property rights, such as women rights, gay rights, minority rights, the right not to be discriminated against, the right to free and unrestricted immigration, which is the right to free trespassing, the right to a guaranteed minimum income or to free health care, or the right to be free of unpleasant speech and thought. The proponents of any of this may call themselves whatever they want, and as libertarians, we may well cooperate with them insofar as such cooperation offers the promise of bringing us closer to our ultimate goal, but they are not libertarians, or only fake libertarians. Now, equally important in the development of a libertarian strategy then is the immediately following next question: who are the victims? Now, the standard libertarian answer to this is the taxpayers as opposed to the tax consumers. Yet while this is essentially correct, it is at best only part of the answer. And libertarians could learn something in this respect from the alt-right. Because apart from the narrowly economic aspect, there is also a wider cultural aspect that must be taken into account in identifying the victims. In order to expand and increase its power, the ruling elites have been conducting for many decades what Pat Buchanan has identified as a systematic culture war, aimed at the transvaluation of all values and the destruction of all natural, or if you will, organic social bonds and institutions such as families, communities, ethnic groups, and genealogically related nations, so as to create inherently an increasingly atomized populace whose only shared characteristic and unifying bond is its common existential dependency on the state. The first step in this direction, taken already more than half a century ago or even longer ago, was the introduction of public welfare and social security. Thereby, the underclass and the elderly were turned into state dependents, and the value and the importance of family and community was correspondingly diminished and weakened. More recently, further reaching steps in this direction have proliferated. A new victimology has been proclaimed and promoted. Women, and in particular single mothers, blacks, browns, Latinos, homosexuals, lesbians, bi, and transsexuals have been awarded victim status and accorded legal privileges through non-discrimination or affirmative action decrees. As well, most recently, such privileges have been expanded also to foreign national immigrants, whether legal or illegal, insofar as they fall into one of the just mentioned categories, or are members of non-Christian religions such as Islam, for instance. The result, not only has the earlier mentioned bad neighbor problem not been avoided or solved, but it has been systematically promoted and intensified instead. Cultural homogeneity has been destroyed, and the freedom of association and the voluntary physical segregation and separation of different people, communities, cultures, and traditions has been replaced by an all-pervasive system of forced social integration. Moreover, each mentioned victim group has thus been pitted against every other, and all of them have been pitted against white heterosexual Christian males, and in particular those married and with children, as the only remaining legally unprotected group of alleged victimizers. Hence, as a result of the transvaluation of all values promoted by the ruling elites, the world has been literally turned upside down. The institution of a family household with father, mother, and their children that has formed the basis of Western civilization as the freest, most industrious, ingenious, and all-around accomplished civilization known to mankind, that is the very institution and people that has done most good in human history, therefore done many bad things, that group has been officially stigmatized and vilified as the source of all social ills and made the most heavily disadvantaged, even persecuted group by the enemy elite's relentless policy of divide et impera. Now, accordingly, given the present constellation of affairs, then any promising libertarian strategy must, very much as the alt-right has recognized, first and foremost be tailored and addressed to this group of the most severely victimized people. White married Christian couples with children, in particular if they belong also to the class of taxpayers rather than tax consumers, and everyone most closely resembling or aspiring to this standard form of social order and organization can be realistically expected to be the most receptive audience for the libertarian message. Whereas the least support should be expected to come from the most highly protected groups, such as, for instance, single black Muslim mothers on welfare. Now, given this constellation of perpetrators or enemies versus victims in the contemporary West, then, I can now come to the final task of trying to outline a realistic libertarian strategy for social change. The specifics of which, I'll come to that in a second, should be prefaced by two general considerations. For one, given that the class of intellectuals, from the tops of academia down to the opinion-molding journalists in the mainstream media and so forth, are funded by and firmly tied into the ruling system, that is, that they are part of the problem, they also should not be expected to play a major, if any, role in the problem's solution. Accordingly, the so-called Hayekian strategy for social change that envisions the spread of correct libertarian ideas starting at the top with the leading philosophers and then trickling down from there to journalists and finally to the great unwashed masses must be considered fundamentally unrealistic. Instead, any realistic libertarian strategy for change must be a populist strategy. That is, libertarians must short-circuit the dominant intellectual elites and address the masses directly to arouse their indignation and contempt for the ruling elites. And secondly, all the while the main addressees of a populist libertarian message must be indeed the just mentioned group of dispossessed and disenfranchised native whites, I believe it to be a serious strategic error to make whiteness the exclusive criterion on which to base one's strategic decision, as some strands of the alt-right have suggested to do, wrongly so, I believe. After all, it is above all white men that make up the ruling elite and that have foisted the current mess upon us. True enough, the various protected minorities mentioned before take full advantage of the legal privileges that they have been accorded, and they have become increasingly emboldened to ask for ever more protection. But none of them, and all of them together, did not and do not possess the intellectual prowess that would have made this outcome possible if it were not for the instrumental help that they received and are receiving from white men.